Welcome everybody to Faith and Feminism. If you're supposed to be in this class, you should be a grad level student. We're so excited to have all of you here, especially Kyle. Welcome to Faith and Feminism. This course is put on and designed by the Women's Studies Department, which is a fairly new department. So yeah, this is a seminar style course, which just means there's going to be less lecture, more readings, and then we'll be discussing those as a class together. So you are expected to have readings done before you come to class, so that way we can have analytical, thoughtful, scholarly discussion together. I find that works much better as far as understanding the material. So with that, we're going to get started. Right off the bat, since this is day one, we're going to do somewhat of an icebreaker / I want to see where everyone is at in this class. So to start off, I want everyone to go around and maybe just give me like 1 or 2 sentences on what you think of when you hear faith and feminism. Or since we're at a Christian university, Christianity and feminism, what are the words that come to mind? Where are the points of contention? That sort of thing. Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Great, thank you.
I actually just listened to a sermon on faith and feminism 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I actually learned, so what's on my mind right now is just kind of, we learned about the historical aspect of like the Roman woman and just like that role and how there was actually like a Roman woman feminist movement going on during that time and how that, just like how that shaped like the way the Bible was written about women and it talked about that aspect. So I guess overall, my thought about like, my initial thought with faith and feminism is just like women, the first thing that comes to mind is like women's like silence in the church a little bit.
Yeah.
And just kind of how that has changed over time. And yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Go ahead.
I think of conflict, that the 2 words don't seem to be compatible, especially historically. I think only in the previous couple of years have I been exposed to something where they can meld together, but growing up I was told women cannot be leaders in the church, that it's their place. I mean, it's not that they had to stay home, but that they couldn't be spiritual leaders, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty common
Yeah.
thing that happens.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The first thing I think of is Bettina Peterson here, because she was kind of my first exposure to
Yeah.
that to that blending of the 2.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like something, but also like I had poor experiences with people who called themselves feminists and with like the way other people talk about what feminism is. And so like I think of Bettina Peterson and like so many other professors here, like Dr. Blessing, Dr. McCoy, who have really like opened my mind to like what it should and be and is.
Yeah. Well, I think too, even just the existence of a women's studies program here on campus, at a Christian campus, says a lot about the ways that they can be in relationship with one another. Go ahead.
I think of women like in the Bible and how we get like the portrayal of like the submissive woman and like that kind of stuff, but you also get how like Jesus women have equal rights to heaven and like the marriage model in the Bible is like partnership.
Yeah.
This is just the melding of the 2.
Yeah. And how Jesus interacted with women in general. I mean, he talked to women and he was close to women and had relationships with them. So yeah, which was not typical for that time period.
I just think of, I guess, kind of my upbringing because I come from like a church background that was just really good at, I guess, at some point in its history, had to face the big question of how to deal with some of the issues that the church has dealt with for a long time, and I think it's always done a really good job. So I don't think about this very much, only because I think my church has done a really good job at including women and really lifting women up over the course of its time. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you guys want to add anything? You're good.
I agree with a lot of what was
Okay.
said. I feel like it's a common experience that a lot of people have, but I also feel like it's something that's like more of a modern issue, especially since like women have been more confined to the home in like the past 200 years. It's like
Yeah.
become more of an issue than it probably would have even been. Like I think it would have been probably a little weird for like any of the women around Jesus to even like have to really think about this. Not that they weren't like experiencing a lot of oppression in their own society, but I think they just would have thought about it totally differently than we think about it today.
Yeah, definitely. But I don't like, for me, I remember when I was a kid and realized or heard about how women first discovered women aren't supposed to have a place in the church, they're not supposed to speak up. They're there's the pastor's wife, but then they're not supposed to be the pastor, and then navigating what denominations feel that way, and then I definitely didn't understand it because it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, I feel like I couldn't be a feminist about my faith, and I also feel like I couldn't have faith if I wasn't a feminist, if that makes sense. All of these answers are so interesting because all of my favorite feminists are deeply rooted in religion, and for the most part Christianity. So my, I guess, interpretation of faith and feminism, they're totally hand in hand.
Yeah. That's a really good segue into our next little section here. So today we're going to go over, hopefully if we have time, 4 women who hopefully you've heard of all of them, otherwise Dr. McCoy would be so disappointed. But, and they kind of demonstrate that of how really all throughout history the two, faith and feminism, have been inseparable, really, really linked. So yeah, we're gonna get right into it. I have a short little clip to play real quick. It's an interview of Sarah Bessey, and we're gonna be reading her book, Jesus Feminist. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best as far as feminist theory goes, but it does provide a lot of really good ideas on how, in a modern context, these two concepts can live out really, really well together.
KiwiCo, and we deliver hands-on STEM projects designed to inspire young innovators.
Well, I think that I think that sometimes people are a little bit confused perhaps about feminist is and what feminism means. It really is equality. It's not to be equated with, matriarchy or, whatever else. And so, I mean, really at the core, it simply means that you believe women are people too. And to me that is, one of the things that really set Jesus apart in his dealings with women was that. And so for me, I understand why people maybe have some baggage around the word for sure. I mean, I never really did. I had a lot of positive associations with the word feminist. There's a lot of different ways to be a feminist, just as there's a lot of different ways to be a Christian. There's some people who have a really visceral reaction, to the word Christian because they kind of have this image tricked out in their mind of what that looks like. Exactly. And we know that that's not always, the case, and that's definitely the case with feminism. I feel like a lot of times when people talk about it in the church, it's a lot more stereotyping. And so sometimes that is almost surprising for people when they meet someone like me who is, married and, mother of children and, loves God, and they're like, oh, well, you can be a feminist.
And quite friendly. I think this image that feminism means you're somehow an angry, placard-waving person.
And I love to be angry with my placard every now and again, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, there's room for, I think, all of those different expressions, and there's room for that. Because at the core, and again, my argument is never that I want people to identify as feminists. I mean, the label does not matter to me as much as maybe people think that it does. Yeah. To me, it's more about the core and the heart behind it, being someone who affirms the truth of that and is able to walk that out. Whether you feel comfortable with the word or not, that's fine. What matters is how you live that out and how that works into your life, and it's more about the core behind it than perhaps the label.
Okay. So it sounds like too that kind of addressed some of the things you guys were talking about too, and that maybe the points of contention lie within, the word feminist versus what it actually stands for. So, have you guys all heard of the Grimke sisters? Great. Okay, good. That makes me feel good about that. So Sarah and Angelina Grimke, they were two sisters. They were born to a family of 14. So a lot of kids. They were born to a slave-owning family in the South. Their father, John Grimke, he was involved in politics. He was on the Supreme Court justice for a while too. And he was not in any way supportive of abolition or women's rights or anything like that. However, the two sisters demonstrated from a really young age, though, their sort of discontent with slavery. There's like a little anecdote from Sarah, who, when she was around 9, she'd seen her dad whip a slave, and she tried to board a steam train and like run away. They took her home, obviously, but. So, I mean, that wasn't necessarily the norm for slave-owning families in the South during this time. And like I said, they grew up in South Carolina. That's where their plantation was. It wasn't until Sarah was an adult, and she was caring for her father, John, who had just recently been diagnosed with some illness, that they moved to Philadelphia to get special care, where he died there pretty quickly after Sarah and him moved there. After he died, that is when Sarah was introduced to Quakerism, which we should all be familiar with Quakerism too. They were really, still are, they're very egalitarian, even, in the early 1800s. Around this time, they were against slavery, supportive of women's rights, allowed women to speak in churches and meetings and all of those things. And she became deeply embedded in that really quickly. She brought her sister Angelina up to Philadelphia with her. Her and Angelina were really close. Angelina even filed to have Sarah adopt her at one point. So they were extremely, extremely close. They got involved with activities pretty much right after they got involved in Quakerism. It started off with abolition, and where they joined the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. And both of them were pretty outspoken. They were educated. They were educated in their father's home simply just by spending time in his library. It wasn't until, a letter by Angelina, she had written a letter to William Lloyd Garrison, who, again, we should all be familiar with at this point. In your college experience, but she had written a letter to William Lloyd Garrison on essentially abolition and anti-slavery and God's calling. William Lloyd Garrison published this without her knowing, and from there the Grimke sisters were famous, and they proceeded to write letters and speak in conventions and speak publicly, essentially to the rest of their lives. Or for the rest of their lives. As far as women's rights go, Angelina was less involved in the women's rights movement than Sarah was. Although, they were both deeply involved, but Sarah wrote more outright about women's rights, whereas Angelina was writing more about women's rights in relationship to abolition, that women should feel empowered to deny and reject all forms of slavery. Which is where she writes an appeal to the Christian women of the South, and it's a book that's a collection of letters on addressing women in the South to not participate in slavery or the promotion of it. And then Sarah wrote letters of the equality of the sexes and the condition of women, which was also turned into a book and is more just directly addressing women and their issues. So what we're going to do next, we're going to read 2 quotes, one by Angelina, one by Sarah, and then we're going to discuss them. We're going to discuss the differences between them, maybe what their different theories on feminism was, and how they utilize their own faith in their feminist theory. Alright, first one, Angelina. This is from her appeal to Christian women of the South. Is that correct? Yeah. It is the duty of all, as far as they can, to improve their own mental faculties, because we are commanded to love God with all our minds, as well as with our hearts, and we commit a great sin if we forbid or prevent that cultivation of mind in others. But some of you will say, we can neither free our slaves nor teach them to read, for the laws of our state forbid it. Be not surprised when I say such wicked laws ought to be no barrier in the way of your duty, and I appeal to the Bible to prove this position. What was the conduct of Shiphrah and Puah when the king of Egypt issued cruel mandate with regard to the Hebrew children? They feared God and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. Did these women do right in disobeying that monarch? Therefore, says the sacred text, God dealt with them and made them houses. So this, just to be clear, this was addressing slavery and the issue of whether or not women could teach slaves to read and write. It was illegal, but some of them were doing it anyways, and this was sort of her response to that. So it is on slavery, but obviously we get some feminist theory in here as well. And this is from Sarah Grimke. The motto of woman, when she is engaged in the great work of public reformation, should be, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" She must feel, if she feels rightly, that she is fulfilling one of the most important duties laid upon her as an accountable being, and that her character, instead of being unnatural, is in exact accordance with the will of him to whom, and to no other, she is responsible for the talents and the gifts confided in her. Okay, where do we see differences? What stands out to you guys? Yeah, Alex.
I think in Angelina's, she stresses the importance of cultivating the mind, since we were called to love God with all our mind. But she kind of stresses it more so that you can go teach the slaves as well. And she really is looking to cultivate the minds of the slaves. And then Sarah, here is kind of specifying it more for like, but focus on your mind as well.
Yeah.
Like for the sake of your own mind, and to not let people say it's unnatural or unfeminine, I guess. That it's as much a part of the calling for women as it is for men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, wow, I forgot the different. I was thinking she's talking more about just like fulfilling your call as an individual and what it means to just, I guess she's appealing more to womanhood in general. And then, was it Sarah was the first one?
Angelina was the first one, this is Sarah.
Okay, Angelina then was appealing to what it means to be a citizen, and she's obviously including what it means to be a woman and a citizen, but she's emphasizing the citizenship more.
Yeah, I think those are good points. I think, it's really common, especially in early feminist theory, and it's not always the case, but it was really common in early feminist theory, to encourage cultivating the mind for the purpose of helping others, which is now, in modern feminist theory, maybe something we go straight away from, and more towards Sarah, where it's, cultivating your mind for your mind's sake. Although I think they both really like scripture, both have really powerful things to say. Both are discouraging fear as a motivation for not doing what you believe is right, which I think is really powerful for this time.
Yeah, I wanted to stress responsibility.
Yeah.
Sarah seems to be more of the mindset that it is your individual responsibility.
Yeah.
You kind of like the sense that you must help yourself before you can help others.
Yeah.
That theory, which you said was more modern, and I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Angelina, while still obviously amusing, was a little bit more along the more old-fashioned suffragette type, where everyone comes together in order to help everyone else type thing. And the individualism wasn't stressed as much.
Yeah, now that we've said it, the Angelina's reminds me a lot more of Republican motherhood.
Yeah.
And that kind of like, the justification of like, it's very important that we educate and like improve ourselves, but for the sake of bettering others.
Right.
So, yeah, and not so much for the individual relationship and faith.
Yeah.
Which is also important, but like, it's for the other people now.
Right. That's a really great connection. And even the way that, she used scripture telling a story about women who helped other men, which is, super related to Republican motherhood. That's great. So I had 2 other women to talk about, but it's 20 minutes, so we're going to be done. Does anyone have any concluding thoughts that they want to finish off with, or questions, So yeah.
Who were the other women?
Sojourner Truth
Okay.
and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I know. I really should have put Sojourner Truth first because she's who I was most excited to talk about. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you.